Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into something pretty heavy, the situation in Ukraine, and why Russia's warnings have everyone on edge.
Yeah, it's a tense situation, and it could become a much bigger problem reaching way beyond Ukraine itself.
Exactly. This isn't just some regional conflict. We're talking about Putin, Western powers, NATO, the possibility of things really getting out of control. That's what we're going to unpack today.
To really understand what's going on now, we have to look back a bit.
Okay, so let's rewind. Remind us how we got to this point.
Well, this conflict really started back in 2014 when Russia took Crimea from Ukraine.
Crimea, that was part of Ukraine, right?
It was. That move already caused a lot of tension, but things escalated dramatically in early 2022.
Ah, right. When Russia launched a full-scale invasion.
Exactly. And that's when the U.S. and European countries started sending billions in military aid to Ukraine.
Right. But everyone's especially worried now. What's changed in the past year to make things even more intense?
The game changer has been long-range missiles. Western allies have been providing Ukraine with weapons like the American ATACMS and British Storm Shadow rockets.
ATACMS Storm Shadow. Those names sound pretty serious. What's so special about them? Why is Putin so riled up?
Well, these aren't your typical weapons. Their reach is what makes them significant.
Okay.
Ukraine can now hit targets far inside Russian territory, places that were previously untouchable.
So we're talking about, like, what?
Key supply routes, command centers, even air bases deep within Russia itself.
So Ukraine can hit back much harder and further than before.
Right. And Putin sees this as a direct threat. He's saying NATO is practically at war with Russia by giving them these weapons.
And what's he saying will happen if they don't stop?
The message is pretty clear. Stop supplying these weapons or face consequences.
And some of those consequences could be terrifying. I've been reading about this Russian hypersonic missile, the Oreshnik. Is it as scary as it sounds?
The Oreshnik is a pretty formidable weapon. It travels at incredible speeds over Mach 10.
Mach 10. How fast is that?
We're talking over 8,500 miles per hour.
Wow. That's like New York to London in under an hour.
Basically. Which makes it almost impossible to stop with current defense systems.
I can see why that's got people worried. But it's not just the speed, right?
You got it. The real danger is that it can carry both conventional and nuclear warheads.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about blowing things up. It could be a nuclear attack.
That's right. The stakes are incredibly high, and this dual capability is really what makes it so dangerous.
Didn't Russia recently use one of these missiles to strike a facility in Ukraine, something about Dnipro?
Yes. There was a strike on a facility in Dnipro.
And what was Russia's explanation?
They claimed it was a legitimate military target. But a lot of people in the West think it was just to show off their power, to intimidate Ukraine and its allies.
So we've got Ukraine trying to defend itself with these new long-range missiles, and then you've got Russia showing off these hypersonic weapons that are basically unstoppable. This doesn't sound good.
It's a very tense situation. Both sides have powerful weapons, and they're not backing down.
So the big question is, can anyone stop this from getting even worse?
That's what everyone's trying to figure out.
Okay, so let's talk about the other major players here.
Yeah.
The Western nations and NATO. They're trying to walk a very fine line, supporting Ukraine without starting a full-blown war with Russia.
Exactly. It's a real dilemma. They believe Ukraine has a right to defend itself, but sending more and more powerful weapons could provoke Putin.
So it's like they're trying to help, but they're also worried about making things worse.
Right. It's a difficult balance.
What about public opinion in these Western countries? Is everyone on board with supporting Ukraine, or are people getting nervous?
It's pretty divided, actually. Some people feel strongly that we have to support Ukraine, no matter the cost.
I can understand that.
Others are worried about the risks, the economic cost, and the danger of getting involved in a war with a country like Russia.
Yeah, especially a nuclear-armed country.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
And then you've got NATO. What's their role in all of this? They're a military alliance, right? So are they obligated to jump in if Russia attacks one of their members?
NATO's role is crucial, and it's a major source of tension with Russia. NATO has this thing called collective defense.
Collective defense.
Yeah. It basically means if you attack one NATO country, you attack all of them.
It's like a big team.
Exactly. It's meant to stop anyone from messing with NATO countries.
So it's like a giant tripwire. But where does NATO draw the line? How far are they willing to go to help Ukraine without starting a war with Russia?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. They're trying to deter Russia without provoking them.
This is getting pretty intense. What are the possible outcomes here? Where could all of this lead?
Well, there are a few scenarios that could play out. Some are more worrying than others.
Okay, so let's talk about those. What does the future hold?
Well, let's start with the worst-case scenario escalation.
Okay, that doesn't sound good. What does that mean exactly?
Imagine this Western countries keep supplying Ukraine with even more powerful weapons.
Okay.
Russia sees this as a direct threat and decides to take things beyond Ukraine.
So not just fighting in Ukraine, but actually attacking other countries.
Right. They might go after the supply lines that are sending weapons into Ukraine, often going through neighboring countries, or even worse, Russia attacks a NATO country directly.
That's like World War III, isn't it?
It's a scary thought, and we can't rule it out.
Yeah.
But it's not the only possibility.
So what else could happen? Is there any chance of things calming down?
There's always a chance, however small, that diplomacy could work.
Okay.
International pressure could force both sides to the negotiating table.
MM.
Maybe they could find a way to de-escalate the situation and work towards a ceasefire.
That would be great. But is that realistic? It seems like both sides are pretty stubborn.
It'd be a long shot for sure.
Yeah.
Trust is really broken down between Russia and the West, and neither side seems ready to back down.
But you're saying it's not impossible.
With enough pressure from the world, it could happen.
What about Putin? Is he really willing to risk a global war over this? Or is he just bluffing?
That's what intelligence agencies everywhere are trying to figure out.
So no one knows for sure.
There's a theory that Putin's threats are all calculated. He's testing NATO to see if they'll back down.
It's like a game of chicken with the highest possible stakes.
Exactly. If Putin senses any weakness from the West, he might be tempted to push even further. But if NATO holds strong and stays united, it might just stop him from taking things too far.
So much uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's all very complex, but I keep wondering what this means for regular people.
It's a good question.
If I'm just listening to this, what should I be taking away from all this?
The main thing is that what's happening in Ukraine affects everyone. It's not just some far-off conflict. It has the potential to change global security and how the world works.
Even if we're not directly involved, we should still be paying attention.
Absolutely. The decisions being made right now could impact everyone, no matter where they live.
Okay, that's pretty sobering. Yeah. We've been talking about these long-range missiles and the hypersonic one. Is this the future of war? Are these kinds of weapons going to become the new normal?
It's a worrying trend for sure.
How so?
These advanced weapons raise the stakes dramatically. They increase the possibility of mass destruction and make conflicts much harder to control.
So it's not just about having lots of soldiers anymore.
It's shifting towards who has the most powerful and destructive weapons.
And that's dangerous.
Very dangerous. It's a dangerous path for the world.
So what should we be looking out for in the coming weeks to see if things are getting better or worse? What are some signs to watch for?
Pay attention to any diplomatic efforts. Any progress in negotiations, even small steps, could be a good sign that things are moving in the right direction.
So any talks, any meetings, anything like that is a good thing.
Right. On the other hand, if military activity increases, especially near NATO borders, that's a bad sign.
Okay, got it. What about Putin's speeches? Should we be reading into those?
Yeah. Listen to how he talks and the words he uses. If he starts using more aggressive language or threats, it could mean he's feeling trapped and might be willing to gamble.
This is really helpful. It helps to have a way to understand what's happening.
Knowledge is power, especially in these complex situations. The more informed we are, the better we can understand what's going on in the world.
Totally agree. We've covered a lot, and it's definitely a lot to think about. But there's one important thing we haven't talked about yet. Yeah, it's easy to get lost on all the politics and the military stuff, but we can't forget about the human cost.
Right. Millions of Ukrainians have had their lives completely upended by this war, lost their homes, families, their sense of security. It's a huge amount of trauma.
And it's not just Ukrainians, right? The Russian people are suffering too.
Of course. They're dealing with economic problems, political repression, and many have lost young men sent to fight in a war they don't even support.
It's just tragic all around.
Yeah. It's a reminder that behind all the headlines and the analysis, there are real people bearing the weight of this conflict.
So as we wrap up today, it's important to remember that this isn't just some abstract political game. This is real life with real consequences for millions of people.
Couldn't agree more. We need to find a peaceful solution, and fast, before things spiral even further out of control.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the beginning of this conflict to these new weapons, the dilemmas facing the West, and what the future might hold.
I think our listeners have a much better grasp of this situation now. It's complex and volatile, but hopefully they understand it better.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
Imagine you're a leader in the West right now.
Yeah.
How would you handle this crisis? What would be most important to you? What would guide your decisions?
That's a really good question. Everyone should ask themselves that. There are no easy answers. But the more we think about these hard questions, the better we'll be able to face whatever comes next.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Ukraine missile crisis. Thanks for joining us today.
It's been great.
We always encourage you to keep learning about these issues, see things from different angles, and talk to each other about what's happening in our world.
It's important.
This isn't over yet. Understanding what's going on is crucial for everyone. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay curious.
Until next time.
See you on the next deep dive.